All right, welcome to the Primal Security Podcast this week, or this month. This is Primal Security Podcast, episode 18. With us this week, we have Andrew, Luke, Zach, and Matt, and me, Lane. And we have a special guest this week with Red Hat. We have Shawn Wells, and we'll dig more into why he's here in a little bit. But we're going to go ahead and get started with some news items and let Andrew start off with that.
Yep. All right, guys. We got a really smart guy with us, as Lane said, Shawn. So we're going to be quick on the news items this week. But the first thing to talk about was going to be holy backdoor Batman. It seemed like this past month we had like backdoors and all the things. I mean, there's Juniper, there's Fortinet, and I feel like I'm missing one just because they're just
Cisco had something today.
Cisco had something today.
It was an RCE, I think.
So okay, but I think it was they're calling it a vulnerability, right? These back doors that are coded into the firmware.
I know Cisco had another thing where like they changed the default password on a whole bunch of their routers to
Cisco 1234.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, they changed it all until like they had to issue a RADA that basically said, if you're having this problem and you haven't patched the newest firmware, use this password.
Jeez.
So, yeah, we'll have some links there to read more about it, but I'm sure if you've been following the news, you've seen a bunch of backdoors and stuff, and they'll probably be there for a long time. Things in networking devices tend to linger. And then we had the last few things I have before we switch it over to somebody else is that there's a bunch of compromises, as there is every month, right? We can't go without those. I'm going to cover a subset, but there's Linode compromise. So if you've leveraged their hosting services, which I know a lot of pen testers do, they had compromise this past month, exposing credentials and whatnot. We also had Time Warner compromise. Yep. So if you're in the South, I know they're like big in the South. We got to play in the South.
The Comcast of the South.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then we had the Hyatt compromise. So if you've used your credit card at DerbyCon, looking at you, Matt. you're like, yeah. I don't know the extent of the compromise. It didn't really aside a lot of details, but that did happen. So
I got a year of free. Credit checks for going to Hampton Inn.
There you go. I just assume all my stuff's taken. Yeah. Just assume it's compromised.
Like 4 credit cards passed when we were at Derby.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's say
because of previous compromises.
Went to Black Hat and Target. 2 weeks later, my account was compromised. I'm like, okay, well,
you shop on a lot of sketchy sites, Luke.
It was Vegas.
Get some weird
I actually got an entire credit card specifically for that purpose.
It's all right. All right, Luke.
Low limit, low interest.
Any news items?
So yeah, actually talking a little bit about the backdoors, a vulnerability in BlackPhone was discovered recently, and it's not exactly a backdoor, but they were doing some, they were prepping for some sort of training, and they were doing some code review on BlackPhone. They figured out there was actually an additional socket on there that no one had ever known about before, and it was not documented anywhere on the internet. They started messing around with it and figured out if they sent the right code to it, they could pretty much take complete control of the phone. It's not full root level access, but it's elevated privileges, but they can do all kinds of stuff with it, send and receive messages, make calls, do all kinds of sketchy like setting changes.
It was on the modem, wasn't it?
It was in the modem, yeah. Basically, they were preparing for a training, did some reverse engineering through IDA, just messing around in the class, and then just stumbled upon this additional socket in there. So that's pretty interesting. If you have a BlackPhone, you're kind of screwed because the whole.
They released a patch, didn't they?
Yeah, but like every 3 months, the friggin' phone gets owned, and
we
have to face the point.
Lane and I had a professor from BlackPhone, so
he was the CTO, I want to say.
Yeah, he was.
Last name was Ford.
Yep,
Ford. Yeah,
nice guy. Yeah,
Henry.
Henry Ford.
Daniel Ford. Yep.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. In addition to that, they also had we also stumbled upon the release of Damn Vulnerable Node application. So anyone who's messed with Damn Vulnerable Web App before may be familiar with the concept. Basically, Damn Vulnerable Web App was a web app set up designed to compromise and teach secure coding practices. This is the exact same thing, but specifically for Node.js web applications. So it's still in beta. They have some requirements in order to get a lot of the stuff to work, and they haven't finished adding all of the different compromise paths and all of that stuff. But it's just getting started. It's up on GitHub. We've got the link in there, and it's definitely worth looking at. I know me, for one, I'm not very familiar with Node.js in terms of assessing it, so it's definitely something that I need to play around with and kind of get smart on. But if you're into that sort of thing and you like learning new skills, I definitely recommend looking at it. And then lastly, I've got actually Andrew stumbled upon this, and then I found it and had no idea that he had already found it. But we found a website that was basically correlating every single security conference from 2015 that has put their talks up on YouTube or some other site. And basically, it's got them all set in one place with the YouTube links. Pretty good resource there. There's about, I don't know, 30 or so different conferences on there with con videos. So definitely take a look at that if you haven't been able to attend all the conferences you wanted to see.
A lot of B-side stuff, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of B-sides. Pretty much every B-sides. They had stuff like OWASP, DEF CON, Black Hat, a bunch of stuff I've never even heard of. RSA Con, I think Derby's on there, ShmooCon, etc.
Cool.
Yeah. Zach?
And this is Zach speaking. I just want to say I hope everyone had a happy holiday to start this one out here. But
Such a Zach
it's just
move.
me. I love Christmas. I'm super into that. I'm depressed that it's over. Anyway,
He's wearing a Santa
My,
Claus hat
my
right
Christmas
now.
tree's still up, bro. I'm not taking that down.
Andrew's is still up, but I took it down because I had a dying tree in my house. But anyway,
I've got a pink Valentine's Day tree up in my house now.
Wow, I didn't
Nice.
do that.
I'm not getting that festive.
I didn't do that.
Hallmark did it, or your wife.
My lovely wife did it.
So a few days ago, as you know, hide your kids, hide your wife. Everyone's hacking your car. Chrysler had a huge issue last year. Now General Motors is saying, hey, let's get ahead of the curve and let's do a vulnerability disclosure program. So they released one basically on the HackerOne platform for bug bounty hunters. But here's the kicker. They're not doing any payouts, and they're over billions in dollar company. So it's just,
What's the incentive to do it then?
here's the thing. All right, so they set a couple of weird rules. They basically say, if you report something to us with enough information that we can reproduce the vulnerability and it doesn't cause harm to our customers' privacy and safety, you're not in violation of the law. So that's kind of like a, hey, tell us, but if it's bad, don't tell us.
Is anyone else having a flashback
We
to
can
the whole
interpret this
Oracle
any way
Adobe?
we want.
Exactly.
Oh,
This
yeah.
sounds like a bad lawsuit coming.
Yeah.
And here's the other kicker they said. They also singled out, if you're from Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, or Syria, you can't tell us. You're ineligible to participate. So they're also blacklisting countries. And the other kicker is Tesla recently came out with one. And Tesla, it was actually last June, I'm sorry. But they basically said, we'll give you $1,000 if you find a cool vulnerability. But it's in our websites only, not in our cars. So GM doesn't even define the scope of this, whether it's the cars, the websites. They're just saying, hey, we have a bug bounty program. So it sounds like it's a work in development. But if they really want some bug bounty hunters to really do some good work, they're going to have to give some monetary.
Yeah, I found a vuln in most cars. I can run up with it with a bat or a sledgehammer and break through the window. And I've been trying to report those bugs for a while now.
Yeah.
Pretty much works in every
Not
model
work.
I've tested.
If the GM thing gets enough press, they'll probably fix it.
Of course. Yeah.
Well,
They'll get
a
some
lot
kind
of the
reward.
cars are getting just.
I don't
these-
mean the cars themselves, but just their sites and stuff. Like they have a huge footprint.
It sounds like they're trying. This is a publicity thing. They're trying to get ahead of all the people who don't have any bounty programs or anything like that. But I don't think they're doing it the right way. They're probably gonna get. It's probably gonna do more harm.
Remember Yahoo had a thing like a year or two ago where somebody found like I think it was like a store cross-site scripting flaw, and they like gave them a hat,
Yeah,
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
and they were like, "What are you doing right now?
Yeah.
Getting a hat?"
Or something like that. Yeah.
I take a hat for like a reflective XSS in the body of a post, but like stored XSS, you got to give me something, bro.
Right. Right.
Like two
Somebody
hats.
paid out recently. It was $2,500 for a stored XSS. I can't remember what. It was a big company though too. But
Wow.
yeah,
Makes sense. You're running code.
$2,500. That's not
I
bad.
think the
If I
guy
find a
that-
vulnerability in a car, I want that car.
Fair enough.
Like that's.
Fair
I
enough.
feel like that's a fair trade.
I think the guy that got the hat though, they ended up getting him money, and they
Yeah, 'cause he
they
complained.
immediately reformed.
They
Yeah.
shamed the crap
Yeah,
out of Yahoo until
exactly.
they gave him money.
So
The only other quick one I have, and this is just kind of a fun one. If you got a really cool, super big, nice Fitbit this past Christmas or holiday, whatever you got, hide your kids, hide your wife on this one too. Brian Krebs, I love to read his stuff. He recently put an article out there about hackers trying to do warranty fraud with your accounts. And what they're doing is it's not Fitbit's fault. It's not a breach on their part, but it's either malware on your system and you own it, and you have a Fitbit, or it's from a third-party site that associates with Fitbit. But people are posting out people's account information along with their model number and make number for their individual user's Fitbit tracker. And this is going on Pastebin. So people are grabbing this, selling it for $2, and they're also calling in and basically saying like, hey, my Fitbit just stopped working. And the way that hackers are doing it is they're going into the customer service, logging in with your creds. They're changing the email to their email. That way, when they call customer service, they're getting everything, and you don't even see it as a customer. And they're saying, "Oh, my Fitbit broke. You need to refund me, or you need to just send me another one." And then they're just selling things. So it's a big warranty fraud that's going on. It's going on. It basically, and the ones they're really going after is the surges because they're $250 a pop.
Will Fitbit just send you a new Fitbit without you
I can actually answer that question. I've been through 7
Luke's our Fitbit guru.
I've actually been through 7. I actually had a string of them go bad on me, and I kept having to replace them.
Yep.
And what they do is they'll send it to you. So what they do is they require you to send it back, then they send you a new one. After it took me 3 attempts. After the 3rd attempt, they finally sent me one. They said, check and make sure it works. If it does work, send the old one back. But it took 3 attempts before they let me do that.
Do you know what the definition of insanity is, Luke?
Yeah, that's
it was so at that point they wouldn't give me my money back. I would have gotten my money back if possible. But with regards to people knowing the make and model of my Fitbit, there's like 4 Fitbits. It's pretty easy to get, so I'm not worried about people getting that.
Yeah. Well, he's saying the warranty fraud part.
The warranty fraud is kind
pretty
of
scary.
But
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, I mean, it just goes back to the main point to land for the resolution remediation was saying that the e-commerce companies that Fitbit partners with should do multi-factor, 2-factor authentication to really try and battle this. So, and they don't because they don't care.
Yeah, their website and all their stuff is pretty garbage.
Well, I just thought that was funny. Yeah, I don't own a Fitbit. I know we have one member in this group who loves it. So.
I count my steps by hand, manual. Trust that technology.
Well, on to you, Matt.
All right, I only have 2 things. The first thing is Microsoft is going to end support for, I think, IE 8, 9, and 10 on almost every platform. I think IE 9 is still going to be supported on Vista Service Pack 2, and there's a couple other weird ones with IE 9, like to the server 2008 SP2. But so there's probably going to be a whole bunch of client-side stuff coming out pretty soon.
And didn't they drop support for Windows 8
flat?
Yeah.
Flat,
yeah.
8.1 is still good.
Yeah.
All those patches that come out now, you can be able to reverse engineer.
But there's always a ton of client-side stuff coming out. And my guess is that this is going to go unnoticed for a while.
It always surprises me, like, they don't really, I mean, they've dropped support for Vista now, and they've dropped support for XP. And XP went on for a long time. Like they were patching that for a long time, and a lot of vendors, like if you're talking about like the Linux vendors, they seem to support their systems for a long time. I think, and Shawn can probably answer this one. I mean, I think Red Hat's still patching Red Hat 5, which came out like what 2005, 6.
Yeah, we got 10-year life cycle. Yeah. And then if you pay us extra, you can get up to 15.
Up to 15 years. So wow.
Yeah. And what was XP at? XP came out in 2002, I think, right?
I think it was before that.
There's just so many systems still on XP. It's
just legacy. They had it going for a long time.
Yeah.
This was quick. It seems like we had XP forever.
Yeah.
And then we had Vista 7, 8, 8.1.
Yeah.
2001.
Yeah.
Into 2001.
Yeah. Wow. So.
Yeah. So they supported XP for like 14 years, 13 years.
Extended support ended in 2014, so 13 years.
Yeah. So and they're cutting off 8, 9, and 10, and there's tons of people out there that are probably still running 9. And easily running 9. So the other thing I had was this Ukrainian power outage. They confirmed was part of the modified version of Black Energy. It's not really the fact that it was a modified version of Black Energy that I thought was interesting. I think next to Target and like retail getting compromised, naked celebrities, power outage and like SCADA stuff is probably number 3 on people's important list. And
my priority is naked celebrities at the top though. So just like
Now if there was an ATM that got hacked, they had a picture of a naked lady at the power plant.
That'd be a trifecta.
That'd be the whole TV for the next week. Yep. But like but everything usually with these SCADA stories is like, this almost happened, and then this one guy in a hard hat
could happen.
Found this PC that had a USB stick in it with horns, and like, or they're like, this almost happened, or this reactor got a little too hot, and then we fixed it. But this one actually worked; like they actually knocked out the power. So I thought it was interesting.
That is cool
because they're always saying like this could happen or this could happen, and it's like, oh, it didn't happen yet. Well, now it did.
Well, users are dumb. I mean, I when I was out in theater that in Afghanistan, that's you had to have people tell signs up on the wall. Don't plug in USB sticks you find laying around. Yeah. I mean,
That's
really?
bad, Matt Damon.
And this was actually from a spearfishing campaign. So that means, I don't know, but that means what? They got spearfished and then they use that same machine to go work on skating equipment,
Oh God.
or they have regional media
Probably.
in their internet connected machine. They connected that media to a technician laptop. Maybe I don't know what the method was, but the air gap failed.
Now
Yes,
you
there is
know
an air
an
gap
awful
that
lot
failed.
about this attack campaign, my friend.
Wiggins classes.
But like, so I just thought it was interesting that they actually succeeded. And Black Energy's not new; it's been around for a while now. And they succeeded in getting through whatever controls were in place just by spearfishing. So that was interesting.
It is interesting.
All right, so I've got two. The first one I got is Let's Encrypt. It's this kind of open, get your own SSL cert service that pretty much anybody can go and get an SSL cert. And the goal is kind of just to encrypt all internet traffic. And recently, there's been a big spat where a whole bunch of people that are running like malware advertising campaigns, so basically encrypt or putting malware in ads, are signing their content with the Let's Encrypt certs. And the Let's Encrypt people basically came back and said, we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to put them on our CRL. And their logic behind that is, we only want to encrypt everything. We're not issuing EV I think it's extended validation certs, which are the ones where you have to go through even more onerous background checks and stuff like that to get it's like a higher trust level of the cert. I mean, their point is, we just want to encrypt traffic. We're not guaranteeing identities.
That's an expensive. That's a business cost.
Yeah, that's a business cost,
Yeah,
and they're very much not a business. They're basically saying we're encrypting everything. We're protecting your traffic from the government.
And think about this. If they do that, not only is it adding a cost, but they are kind of losing customers, right? Because they're losing their that malware customer base.
So I'll get back to.
So I mean, they lose money.
I think that they do have a very honest goal, and I forgot exactly who all is attached to it, but there's some big names attached to it, and like the EFF and things like that. It's just, they're basically saying, hey, we're all in for encryption. Past that, we're not guaranteeing any sort of validity of the certs we're giving. We're just saying our certs are our certs, and we're encrypting the traffic. Trust the certs for encryption. That's all you should trust them for. Second thing also has to kind of pretty much do it with encryption, and it was just released today, or the information on it was just released today. OpenSSH has a vulnerability in it where if you connect to rogue, or I guess untrusted servers, they can request basically dumps of your RAM that will give basically your private keys over to that untrusted server. So they released a new patch for it. There's a few mitigations out there.
There's even a Bro script out there that can help with the detection of it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not too difficult to detect, but I mean, it's a pretty significant vulnerability, especially if you're connecting to a lot of places that you're not sure where they are for some reason or another. But yeah, so we see a lot of bugs with these huge open source projects, and it's unfortunate because the internet is kind of built on them. So without further ado, we've got Shawn Wells here again. Just kind of, Shawn, if you want to introduce yourself and kind of tell our listeners about you, and we can go from there.
Sure. So my name's Shawn. I work out of the CTO office of Red Hat's government team. So my background was I actually got started as a civilian at NSA doing signals intelligence, and then really fell in love with intelligence. And back then, signals intelligence was this is in the early 2000s, was the word for cyber. So I've been doing that for about 16 years now, either as a tactical SIGINT analyst. So I was the nerd riding in back of Humvees trying to find people by tracking their cell phone signals. And then I got into consulting. So some elementary pen testing back when you could do like a buffer overflow of Woo FTP daemons. And then I got defensive. And these days I write things like the DoD STIG. So you might love or hate me, but I also work to automate it. And hopefully we could chat about how we're making the STIG kind of suck a little bit less.
Yeah, so I guess we can kind of talk about that first. So I know with me, I kind of started off in the security realm, and I was doing, your network scanning and trying to get systems accredited for, their DIACAP and DIDSCAP and stuff like that. And so you had massive checklist, and, is this registry entry set on the Windows box? Is your, are you allowing root login on SSH connections and stuff like that? And it was all extremely manual processes. And I remember the Red Hat 5 STIG was, I don't know, like 600 checks or something ridiculous like that.
492, actually.
He knows it down to a T.
No, I'm not even being facetious, and that's what's so sad about it.
I love it.
So I guess, to automate a lot of that stuff, I know we would do things like create STIG'd images and back them up with like Ghost and stuff like that, which still required some manual intervention. But some of us were like bash scripts or command scripts. And I guess kind of go into that and tell us like how, I guess, SCAP is fixing and saving the world from massive checklists.
Yeah, so we had, so I was my very first government job, like as a government civilian, I was a PHP programmer, and I basically had to like make this form that updated a MySQL database of GPS coordinates. So if we ever wanted to change either something on the front end PHP app, like the form name or some field description, what we'd have to do is we make the change, we go through this like really sucky configuration management process, and to push to production, we had to tell a third-party organization, like our security guys were never on the development team, and they wanted to know like what was changed, was it security relevant, and they would run through, to your point, these like security checklists that were, are your passwords the right length? Is your disk partition, is temp on its own partition? And it's like, guys, we changed the name of a form name. But they had these like 3-ring binders, literal 3-ring binders, that they would go, type a command, check the output, and see if it matched. So we had these problems where it's like, guys, I changed a PHP form name. Like, why are you revalidating my disk partitioning? And to push out like one change would take, I thought it was trivial, but to push out a change, it'd take days. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a way to automate these checklist compliance kind of regimes? And that automation, some people did it in bash scripts and Python scripts, or pick your language du jour. But the challenge we had with that is, as soon as you changed an integrator from like Lockheed Martin to Jargon Dynamics, or somebody quits and the new guy likes a different scripting language, we had a challenge about like how to standardize the report formats, how to standardize the way we check, and also how to standardize the interpretation of the control. So if I tell you like audit privileged user actions, well, all of us on this podcast are going to have a different interpretation of what a privileged user action is. So about 4 years ago now, I got a call. I was working for Red Hat, and I got a call from a blocked number. And on the other end of that was this guy. He's like, "Hi, my name is Mr. Blank. I'm joined by Mr. Smith, and we'd like to talk to you about Red Hat security. We're from the NSA." And like, I thought their names were just total BS. But I took the meeting and I went out to this building near the BWI airport and met these guys. And they were all like, I don't know, somewhere around 30. We all were roughly. And we got really passionate about creating a machine language that would standardize the interpretation, which basically meant like NSA would interpret it and say, hey, we're the NSA, we're king. And then it would also standardize the implementation, like privileged users, here's exactly what it means, here's exactly where you need to set the config values. And then it would standardize the reporting. And the challenge we had, one of the first challenges, is like in the government realm, you have all these different security configuration scanners. So you have like Tenable has, I forgot, Nessus, or in the DoD realm, it's called ACAS. And then you have like the SPAWAR SCC tool, and every tool had different results. So what we wanted to do was create a body of content that could be used across any tool. And we open sourced it in the form of something called the SCAP security guide. And it's I realize like I'm talking actually fast. So what the SCAP security guide is it's like a body of configuration controls expressed in this XML way. And it gives you a prose guide that you can use, like, you know, it's just your normal like HTML or PDF security hardening guide. But it also gives you a machine language to do your pass or fail scanning. So why like that's important is that as we go through, what we've ended up doing is Red Hat kind of started this open source thing. We fast forward like 3 years and 4 years. Now we're shipping it in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. So now for the first time, you install Linux, and usually you do the next. It's kind of mind-numbing. One of those screens now is security, and on the security screen you have the it's like a drop-down, multiple options of what profile you want. So it can automatically install your system to like DoD STIG or PCI or FSMA. Kind of automatically, and it will give you the attestation like a compliance report would that says, yeah, I installed to the DoD STIG, here's my red light, green light, pass or fail. And because we've worked with the NSA in developing all of this, the US government accepts these reports as truth. You know, if the report says your passwords are configured correctly, they are. So let me kind of take like maybe a break there. So does that make sense? How do you guys, have you heard about that?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I've worked in the accreditation field a lot, and I've also worked in the pen testing field. So it's awesome to see value on both sides, because as somebody that's trying to get a system accredited or a system on the network, basically having a secure box, out, from a fresh install is so beneficial. And I hope that Windows or Microsoft kind of picks that up for their system, something similar at least, that would, bring hardened systems. But also as, a tester, it means you don't have to test for, stupid things anymore. Like, are your ports open? Do you have the default password?
Yeah.
Can root log in, and all this stuff. So it gets rid of the basic stupidity that you see on the network.
And Shawn, I'm sure you with this baseline security checks, and installations, even with the automation process, a manual review will probably have to occur, but it'll be much less overhead, don't you think?
We still have customers who feel that way, right? So they still want to like type a command and make sure that the passwords are the right length or the audit rule is right. So I think you're always going to get that, at least for the next couple of years culturally. What we started to do is, so I guess the question is like, how do we begin building trust that you don't have to manually verify everything?
Right.
So what we ended up doing is working with NIST, specifically their cybersecurity directorate, and a guy named Dave Waltemar. So the premise was like, okay, Red Hat, it's cool that you built this catalog of controls. It's really great that it automates pass or fail. How do I know if I can trust your content? So whenever we submit like a formal baseline, such as the DoD STIG or FSMA moderate, we send it over to NIST as well as NSA's Information Assurance Directorate, and they actually sign off on it. So there's a series of automated tests, like they try and break the system and pass and fail where it should. And they also go through and manually review everything and give us findings. So our content that we actually ship is certified by NIST. So that's kind of a level of trust. And that is something that is a bit unique, where now we have an open source project that's on GitHub. It's github.com/OpenSCAP. And you can have the content, interpreters. It's all open source and free. And like we actually created it as a public domain license. So you don't even have to worry about Apache versus GPL. As we move down the opensource.org to Red Hat, what we end up doing is we ship it as a RPM. So like Lane, I think it was Lane, was mentioning the OpenSSH information leak. So part of the flaw was that the way it implemented client roaming features was just kind of jacked. So it's since been patched. The patch has been out for like 5 or 6 hours for RHEL 7. But just because you have a patch doesn't mean you're actually mitigating the full threat. So an example is also like Heartbleed, where, you know, when we patched all of the crypto libraries, it doesn't mean that your web server is not using the old algorithms. So how do we mate the binary vulnerability, like the CVE, with the configuration to ensure that it's set? So I guess that's a really long way to say that we're talking a lot about DoD STIGs, passwords, and audit rules. What we also have the ability to do is introspect applications, software that's installed on the machine. So we can do things like, based on all of the software installed, so Apache, Bind, the kernel, audit, OpenSSH, compare that to a known vulnerability list and CVE list or IAVA for DoD, and make sure my system's patched. And what Red Hat, the OpenSCAP stuff is doing is like the SSH client vulnerability that came out today. There's in RHEL 7, you can actually mitigate the entire issue by setting a use roaming configuration option in your SSH config. So
right.
Like now what we've been able to do is update the SCAP content to make sure that use roaming is set to no. And that way your configuration will pass as well as your CVE, like binary vulnerability. So that's something that's kind of new, at least that I have known about. And it's shipping today, actually.
Yeah. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have. You know, we talk a lot here about vulnerabilities and patches and stuff like that, but a lot of people don't realize. And I was doing some testing for someone earlier this week, you know, and was doing some scanning, and they're like, oh, our server is completely up to date, we patched everything. But then I ran a scan on the web server, and it was vulnerable to Poodle and the fallback options and everything. And all of that was because they were using, you know, SSL v3 and had the fallback options, and we're using weak ciphers. So that's where, you know, something like security automation can definitely prevent a lot of weaknesses, because, you know, it's not just a buffer overflow that's going to get a system compromised. It's using weak crypto and maybe having somebody listening to your traffic.
Yep. Yeah. So it's the ability to, so like a lot of the vendors now, VMware, Microsoft, Red Hat, even Symantec, we publish our CVEs as like twice a day as a SCAP based stream. So, you know, it takes all the metadata of what's installed, compares it against the metadata of like the new CVEs, pass or fail. And then we ship the configuration attestation kind of as like a sidecar or in parallel. And that is really like we're trying to solve some of like the host configuration integrity. And a lot of that's being mandated now part of the challenge is it's being mandated through programs like the DHS CDM or continuous diagnostics and monitoring mitigations. So now, like, there's open source technology to meet some of these government mandates where just a year ago there wasn't.
And I think Zach just posted a blog post about what CDM was. CDM in there?
Yeah, I mean, CDM is just very. It's another acronym, very similar to continuous monitoring perspective. You know, the whole CMS.
Yeah.
And that's the hot new, kind of like you said earlier, Shawn, signal in cyber. You know, so nowadays everyone's like, oh my God, like continuous monitoring, like that's the new hot trend, a new hot word. So everyone's definitely thinking like, all right, let's throw that big bad, acronym in there and it just kind of make sure that it fits in with our systems and protecting, especially from a defensive focus. I went to the SANS training for the continuous monitoring. I think it's 508 or 501. I'm trying to remember right
511.
now. 511? Okay, thank you, Andrew. Andrew knows better number. They have so many damn.
Yeah.
I don't know why I know that. I don't know why I know that.
But the GMON, and I went to that course, and they just recently released the cert and everything. But it was very defensive focused. It was awesome. Like, it was a lot of PowerShell, and it's just very focused on defense and monitoring and automating for sure. Definitely Windows focus more than Linux for sure. So it's kind of interesting to hear, from a different perspective. You're on the Red Hat side, all Linux, and it's just, Windows thinks they have their game solved while you guys are really just trying to help the industry as a whole. Sounds like.
I mean, I personally certainly love the whole like Microsoft versus Red Hat competitive conversations. But what's nice is SCAP is actually cross-platform. So Microsoft has published content, Red Hat, VMware.
That's good.
I was about to say Citrix, but I think I might be lying. To find out if I'm lying, NIST actually has a central repository of content called the National Vulnerability Database. And what's cool about it is you have all the vendors making their SCAP content for configurations publicly available. So you can get SCAP content for something like Chrome, Internet Explorer, Red Hat Linux. And because on the Red Hat side, all of this is open source based, we specifically enabled derivatives like CentOS and Scientific Linux. The configuration side will work on derivative platforms as well. So it allows us to have a standardized process to your CDM story, a standardized process across multiple computing platforms. And that's, it sounds so trivial when you say it out loud, like, why, of course we need automation. But it's been 3-4 years, and that community has grown from, like 3 dudes to about 23 different government agencies spanning like NSA, FBI, DHS, the Coast Guard, FEMA, and commercial entities like Lockheed, or even Secure Innovations. The company, the Lane works for, has contributed code.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think the whole of taking a common platform where you can work across multiple tools is going to be huge. Moving away from that distributed, like, I got my Bash scripts, I'm going to take them with me. I got my Python scripts, I'm going to take them with me, to working out of an open source community where you can work off multiple tools and they can pull that content in and do the checks.
Especially if the vendor's involved, because I know a lot of the old DISA STIGs were like developed by contractors. For if I went in there and developed the Microsoft Windows STIG by hand, it's guessing when, you want to have people that are actually involved with the development of the OS and everything. Yeah. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. So that's actually a really awesome point, Lane. So what we ended up doing is, because this is on GitHub, over the years, we formed a really good relationship with DISA FSO, and it's a group in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And if you've never heard of sunny Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, it's not surprising. It was. Sorry?
Is it near the Yingling Brewery?
I have no idea, actually.
President Bro.
It might describe like some of the RHEL 5 configuration settings if it was.
That's
Pottsville. See, Matt knew.
I Googled it.
I drink a lot of Yingling.
See, I drink a lot of Yingling.
Yeah.
Stare at that bottle.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. But yeah, so what we ended up doing is by putting on GitHub, DISA FSO has written into the Rel 6 STIG, like the GitHub stuff will serve as the upstream of the official Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 and Future 7 STIGs. So what's cool about that is for the first time, like it's not just a bunch of, I mean, honestly, in the past, the Red Hat STIG was made by a bunch of Windows guys who want a contract to write the Linux STIG. And it caused issues about usability. So now, like, if you don't like it, you can just patch it. Like, go to GitHub, send a patch, and assuming community accepts it, you can actually help make these government baselines better. And that is also kind of a first. And now we're talking a lot about Linux, but we also wrote content for Java for the JDK. We wrote content, it started for OpenStack. We wrote it even for Webmin and Chrome. So this project is kind of extending our portfolio out. And if there are pieces that people are passionate about, like one guy came to us about 2 weeks ago, maybe, and he's since written nearly like 20,000 lines of code to support this on Ubuntu and Debian 8 specifically.
Oh, very cool.
It's cool.
That is
cool.
Yeah. So yeah, that's oh, and you know, we talked about like we do it in install time, but what's also cool is you can run it ad hoc. So there's a command line interpreter, so you can script it, as well as like third parties such as ACAS or Red Hat Spacewalk, or the open source config management tool, or Satellite, the enterprise one. They all support this SCAP content. So now I can have one body of content across multiple tools running like every day at midnight. And now instead of like, what would we do? Like we do a STIG scan maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, and God knows what changed. So we can just run it every day. And if something changes, we're instantly alerted to that fact.
Hashtag continuous monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just being honest. That's what everyone wants. So there you go.
Yeah, well, what's kind of cool is we've started to build this into Docker. So, you know, the RHEL compliance is kind of the big gorilla that we kind of have to supplicate to do more interesting work. Maybe I shouldn't say that, especially being from Red Hat, but that is kind of what it is. So where we've been moving towards is the ability to do this on Docker hosts. So we have like these maybe 4 challenges. The first is host integrity, so making sure the BIOS is right and nobody's put in USBs. And then we have to worry about runtime container integrity, you know, malware. The third maybe could be described as container isolation. So how is my stuff secured differently than somebody else's, and how do I know they're not going to get my memory? And then like, I don't know, what's the fourth? Like the integrity maybe of the images.
Yeah.
So if we break, I've never really broke apart that challenge in that way. So like the host integrity side, you have technologies like Intel's TPM. So the idea is you create a cryptographic hash of all the hardware, you seal it to that device, like this hard drive with this BIOS and this driver is compromising this endpoint. And then you have Intel TXT, which kind of extends that trust attestation to operating systems like Linux and Windows. So now I can do a trusted boot. And we've actually extended that out with a partnership with Intel into the KVM hypervisor, and we're working on Docker as well. So now I can have like a truly trusted boot of a virtual infrastructure, whether you're using a hypervisor like KVM or containerizations like Docker.
So can we switch to Docker real quick? Because I think Docker is kind of the next frontier for this type of thing. Right now, I feel like web is the big hot mess that a lot of people are doing vulnerability assessments and things with. And I think Docker is, you know, an up and coming technology that's really going to be big over the next few years.
Yeah. So Docker is, a package format. So there's Docker Inc. There's Pivotal, which commercialized it. There's even Red Hat's own what we call OpenShift as all like commercial implementations of it. So one of the things we're trying to do is you can create what's called a Docker file, which is the spec that composes what will be in your container. And the challenge is like, okay, so I have a Docker file and I know what's going in my, why don't we just call it container? I know what's going in my container, but is my container going to run on a trusted environment? So TPM, TXT can create that attestation. And then we get into runtime integrity and container isolation. So for that isolation, there's a technology, it's called SVirt or SecureVirt, and it's basically the application of SE Linux to containers. And like the history lesson on SE Linux is way back when in big iron days or whatever, you'd have your database server running next to your DNS server, and if one became compromised, you're screwed. So wouldn't it be nice if we could create virtual resource regions for my DNS server and my database server so we can kind of compartmentalize these things? And we did that with labels. So now when we extend this to Docker, as you're running a Linux container, it gets a unique label like Lane's container, and then mine would have Shawn's container. The underlying kernel, whether it's on Scientific Linux or CentOS or RHEL or Atomic, will actually create policy that says, Shawn's container is not allowed to talk to Lane's container, and that communication path can be allowed or denied at the memory level, at the chip level, at the data level, and at the network level. So now we have this like security policy that allows or prevents the communication. And what we've done, the SE Linux implementation of that, is we actually got together with NSA and certified it with something called common criteria. So the idea is like our implementation of labeling for Docker, as well as for KVM, has been formally evaluated and like pen tested by NSA. And we also hired a third-party lab called AtSec to do a offensive pen test with it as well, and code review. So now we have like this trust model for multi-tenancy with containers that arguably we really didn't have before.
Very cool. Does the SCAP library work with the containers? Can you like run like an open SCAP audit against a container easily, or I guess you could run it within it, but
yeah, so you can run it within it, right? So within a container is just another instance of Linux, and that's all well and good. What we ended up doing is there's a guy named Martin Preisler, as part of the open source community. He actually works for Red Hat, but he works on the community side of it. And what he ended up doing was writing a library, and we shipped this now, to do introspective scanning of Linux containers, Docker images. So from my base platform, I can go in and scan all of my Docker images in like a Docker registry. I can introspectively scan everything that's running, and I can do that for the CVEs that we talked about, as well as the configuration of the images themselves. And that's actually shipping in RHEL 7.2, and Scientific and all that stuff.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So now it gets us into like, God, what was it? 8 months ago or something, the press started freaking out because I forgot who it was. Somebody did a evaluation of Docker Inc.'s registry, and they found something like 70 or 80% of the images contained known CVEs or had things like root login enabled. So wouldn't it be wonderful if I could do a Docker pull and download it to my local environment, and before I actually run it, it will check for known CVEs, both of the operating system and applications loaded on top, like Apache or Nginx or Node even, as well as the configuration of those for, say, DoD STIG settings. So now, like, I get really jazzed about it, because as we start talking about continuous integration and continuous delivery, that's all well and good when we're just pushing code. But in enterprise environments and certainly within government environments, we have to attest the security as well. So it's like all the automation about code changes is entirely worthless to me if I can't show that it's still STIG checklist compliant. So now, as part of my Jenkins scripts, whenever I'm doing a build, I can compile my code and get together my whatever deployable artifacts and do an introspective security scan, all in the same process. So like every time I do a git commit, it automatically can issue a security scan on the fly for me. So now I can do delivery of things like trusted applications and trusted Docker images. And I think in the government space, the fusion of SCAP with CI/CD is really what will allow us to take advantage of like future microservice designs, or even something more basic like OpenStack and elasticity, where we just couldn't fuse security with the elasticity even, say, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of systems are starting to be built with security in mind, which is, great for the defensive side. Yeah, for everybody at the end of the day. Makes the pen tester's job a little bit less interesting, but
yeah. Well, like I agree with you, right? So I'm using the term checklist security, and there's a difference between compliance and security, and that's like well debated. And what I mean by that is SCAP or security automation scales security in a way that we haven't before. So, you coming back to that OpenSSH vulnerability that was bounced around today, the fact that some pen tester found it, congratulations, great. But now when I go to remediate, I have the SSH config option that use roaming no. I can make an SCAP check, put it into SSG, which is delivered as an RPM, and then I just update an RPM, and all of a sudden, all of my Linux endpoints have mitigated the threat. Whether that's a Linux endpoint as a VM or a bare metal or a Docker image, it really doesn't matter anymore. So now we can kind of scale security by, before, can you imagine having to log into 100 different systems to set some configuration option or to validate a configuration option? And that's kind of what we're moving forward with, at least in the OpenSCAP realm.
That's very cool. So I think we're about ready to wrap it up for the day. We're about to hit an hour on our record time. So just want to thank Shawn for coming on. And Shawn, do you have any closing bits for listeners or anything?
So everything I chatted about is on GitHub, and it's github.com/OpenSCAP. And what we're starting to work on is SCAP profiles for OpenStack, as well as we're continuing to advance the tooling about Docker introspection. And on the GitHub site, you can find the mailing list. You can find our patch backlog if you're so inclined, and it's a great way to get involved.
Very cool, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. So that's us signing off. Primal Security Podcast, episode 18.
Thanks, guys. Thanks again, Shawn.
Thanks a lot, Shawn.
Yes.
Have a good night.